Johannes, you are working at Porsche, China,
Exactly.
as a product manager. Can you briefly describe what you do?
I'm now working there for almost 6 years already. So I started off as a, let's say, electric mobility program manager. So in the Porsche terms, that's called a product manager e-performance. So I was basically the product manager for the first all-electric Porsche, the Taycan, which for the company by itself was quite a major step, like from this kind of petrol-head-driven ICE brand to a new electrified era, basically. But aside from that, I then took over a lot of, let's say, special project roles. Now what I can talk about is my work that I did on autonomous driving and, let's say, the wider, let's say, intelligent connected vehicle aspect of things, where of course even at Porsche we were looking heavily into the Chinese market to on the one side look for inspiration, but also to just stay ahead, or let's say going with the Joneses, basically.
Let's see. Autonomous driving, that sounds like the future of the future. What is happening today?
Well, I mean, an interesting aspect is with autonomous driving. You always see the big announcements of Elon Musk with like, yeah, level 4 is around the corner, basically. Next year we have robo-taxis. And then he's doing that for years already, if not decades. Now, I think finally we have a proper level 3 system in the market. I'm talking about level 3 driving in Germany, where actually the Germans were the first one to kind of draft a standard on commercial use for autonomous driving, and then basically brought with Mercedes-Benz S-Class and EQS the first systems onto the market. However, one has to say it's still very limited within the framework conditions. It has to be perfect weather, speed bands of like 60 kilometers per hour, and so on and so forth. Now, China, on the other hand, is a bit different, because you have to understand the country by itself is huge. So you already still have some kind of disparity between the well-developed East Coast cities and then, let's say, further inland. So that's why you don't necessarily have like a full commercial use released level 3 vehicle in China yet. However, I mean, what I see personally and from all the manufacturer announcement is that the Chinese definitely industrial policy wise really look into that area. I mean, I said it before with intelligent connected vehicles, they really want to be a superpower in that realm, and you see that now with the chipsets they build in, with the sensor sets, like very expensive hardware, and the big machine learning algorithms they are running to catch up, where let's say the Germans now have a leading role, and maybe where Tesla at some point with their vision only kind of thing will also play a big role.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned level 3 and level 4, so could you explain in layman terms what those mean?
Oh, well, let's really do it in layman terms. I mean, what you have nowadays in all the cars is baseline level 2 system. So if you talk about an adaptive cruise control, so a car basically following a car in front of it, that's like an assistance system. Like we call it an ADAS system, advanced advanced driver assistance system, basically. Now, in the level 3 system, that actually goes so far that the customer basically in the car could watch video. Like in China, you would talk about iQIYI, Youku, Xiaohongshu, Douyin, whatsoever. The car then, under these certain framework conditions, will drive itself, and if the framework conditions are met and the car has an accident, then the manufacturer will take over the liability. So it's heavily handed on the liability. That's why it also took a while to really develop these level 3 systems and above to basically have enough safety, functional safety, that the passengers are not hurt within those conditions. Now, level 4 in layman conditions means actually the customer, driver, passenger, or whoever, they all could sleep in the car, and the car would drive themselves through wherever they want to go. So it goes a little bit from a pure transportation device more to a sleeping device in a sense, or whatever else you can do in there.
And you mentioned that liability is currently the biggest hurdle in launching this level 3 and level 4 vehicles.
I mean, if it's a hurdle, I'm personally coming out from a European manufacturer mindset, I wouldn't say it's a hurdle, because in the end you talk about lives at stake. Mm-hmm. So this is our mindset, where like most of the Western manufacturers are thinking like that. It's a transportation device. It transports people from A to B, and you want the people to be safe. And there's all these ethical questions. Now, what happens if the system suddenly crashes into a group of people? will it kill one person on the other side just to avoid more deaths, and all these kind of ethical dilemmas. And I think these are all
insurance dilemma.
Everything, the road and safety law, and everything. So it's not easy, and that's why I think this is all important questions one has to be answered. And it's already telling if the technology, like what I said about Mercedes-Benz, is so far advanced that they actually can take over the liability, then that's a good thing.
I see.
That's added safety and added value for the customer.
Yeah, and you mentioned that China may have an advantage in accelerating the commercialization of level 3 and level 4 vehicles.
So, I mean, what I said, it's pretty straightforward. So if you look at the Neos of this world, the Lishangs, the Xiaopangs, what they built in, like in terms of sensor sets, that's quite expensive to some extent. I mean, people argue it doesn't make sense. Is it a good business case whatsoever? But still, like what they do with all of that, they collected a lot of data. Now, if you have this kind of LiDAR sensor set, it's a laser scanner basically that scans the environment around it, and that's really like a high definition picture of the environment, including depths and everything related to it, and then it's kind of fused with the geolocation. Now, if you have these data points and you have specific situations where the algorithm can learn, that of course has a lot of benefits, because if you have a continuous algorithm update, that they call it in this sphere the big loop, then at some point you will reach a stage where it gets exponentially better. So,
better regarding safety.
Regarding safety, but also regarding more use cases.
I see.
So for instance, what I said about the Mercedes-Benz, they obviously work with a narrow use case. I mean, they still work in it very well, and they're the first ones to do that. But they have the 60 kilometers an hour speed bands, sunshine, no rain, no snow, no whatsoever, yeah? And then now imagine if you have this exponential basic algorithm training behind it, then there is a potential that you can do much more, much faster.
I see. So it sounds like Chinese manufacturers are using more expensive and higher performance sensors so that they can collect more data
and computing units even.
Yeah, so that they actually have better algorithm to understand the environments and then test the different conditions so that the journey would be assumingly safer.
Safer and much more customer benefit. I mean, the one example that strikes me nowadays is the Huawei technology. I mean, you can argue sometimes about Huawei from a Western point of view. I mean, you see the media, but still, technology-wise, they're pretty cutting edge. And then what they basically did is they really sort of illuminated kind of got rid of this overall parking pain point that the Chinese customer has. So with their system, I mean, okay, it's a level 2 system, so technically the customer has a liability. But now what happens, the customer drops his car at the drop-off zone and the car completely parks itself basically. And fully, like, it's not fully autonomous that you have a liability handover, but it's just solving the pain point. Like, for instance, when I want to drive my Tesla Model 3 to the IAPM shopping mall, it's sometimes a pain, because then you have these kind of parking lifts where you're really in danger to stretch your beautiful Tesla rims. I mean, they don't have many rims, but imagine that for more expensive cars, then it gets very costly and very painful to search for a parking lot, small narrow spaces, and they really went to almost exterminate that. And there's also globally something first that I personally, for my manufacturer monitoring, or like if you look out in the markets that I've seen basically.
From your own perspective, what do you see happening in the EV market in China and globally? What are the major trends?
I think the China EV market, a big trend I saw, and I have to give them kudos, is the kind of end-to-end aspect, how they thought about EVs basically. I mean, it started back then basically in 2009 with this white paper of this Minister of Science and Technology, Wang Gang, who used to be an ex-Audi guy, where he really drafted the outline of how China should become an electric mobility future superpower. So what they now achieved, if you look at the latest sales figures and how many electric cars are driving around whatsoever. But then coupled with that, you had a lot of end-to-end kind of thought through processes in the typical Chinese fashion, where like politicians are usually having engineering degrees, and they have really thought about the nitty-gritty details of how to properly establish an EV leadership. So it started with setting up charging infrastructure, like charging infrastructure incentives. Nowadays it's very ubiquitous, at least on the East Coast, to find a charging pile. Then it went into, like, say, battery life cycle management measures, where of course the battery itself can be a dirty part if it's not properly recycled. So they really came up with proper ways to recycle that, to recycle the raw materials, because in the end, once you have a battery, it can be recycled and then it can be built into a new battery, and that's almost no loss, basically, and in the raw materials involved. So these batteries that they have now, that they recycle on the Chinese market, they can work for electric cars for the generations to come, basically. And this is what was also a world's first to have this really holistic aspect from production of the battery all the way to, like, end-of-life battery utilization, maybe home energy storage systems, or, let's say, proper recycling. Now, speaking of battery, one funny standard, I found it funny, was this thermal propagation standard, where suddenly the car is telling the driver 5 minutes before it's exploding or before it's burning down, that it will burn down in 5 minutes. So it's a little bit.
5 minutes.
Yeah, that's what the standard says. It's a little bit like Mission Impossible, you know, that Tom Cruise gets this message will self-destruct itself in 30, 29, 28 seconds, and it feels a bit like that.
There's a bomb in your car, it's going to explode in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
What are you going to do about it?
Exactly. But it might. I said it's funny, but it's actually. I found that it was very far ahead for it, because I mean, in the beginning you had, like, with some cell chemistries, if the raw materials were not right enough or the general battery packaging was not right enough, you still had, like, accidents where cars burning down. I mean, you had this famous Tesla case where the Tesla Model S was lit up, everything was filmed with a parking garage camera, and that's obviously where you had this serious underlying problem, and where they kind of found a solution to it, because then automatically that kind of spurred the innovation of the battery industry. And that's why, also, of course, coupled with all the other policies that you had there, nowadays the Chinese battery industry is one of the most competitive globally. I mean, there is this Heritage Foundation rough estimate where they talk about almost 80% of some sort of battery supply chain running through China. I mean,
Wow.
Graphite, or like refining of lithium, or even unearthing of lithium. Look at the resources they have, but then all the way down, like, to the big names. CATL, for instance, is always stated, or even BYD, that does a lot of very good batteries as well. Now, this was the Chinese aspect of it. I think what they then really managed was to set a global kind of trend for new energy vehicles, or like battery electric vehicles, because in the end it's the United States and it's China that will decide on global mobility trends, because the markets are just so huge, and with their big kind of sales figures of BEVs, they really set the trend forward and kind of to some extent made the decision for the rest of the world to go electric as well. I mean, of course, on top of that, you have a lot of new trends that where the Chinese are now defining new kind of ways to design these electric vehicles. I mean, they really use this Tesla playbook to design their vehicles that are just looking like a Tesla, or like not necessarily looking like a Tesla, but if you look at the experience in the car, the screen setups, and all this design of the car as a third living space, basically, this is, I think, where that will catch on in the rest of the world already. And by all means, some manufacturers, like look at Mercedes-Benz, they kind of look at the Chinese market sometimes first before they bring products to other markets. So it definitely in this space can be like an innovation engine for the rest of the world.
Let's see. It sounds to me that China is really leading in the EV market. So for a foreign player such as Porsche, What do you say they can do to stay ahead in this particular market?
I cannot say obviously about Porsche because there's a lot of proprietary information. But speaking generally about foreign players, I did the other day a LinkedIn post about it. I think it's important to look at what the Chinese players are doing. Look at the concepts that are doing. I just mentioned it with the third living space. So look at some of the cars. They're really not designed for a mobility tool to get from A to B because the country never was using them for that. Like look at Germany, Canada, United States. They need a car to get to work or to see your in-laws whatsoever. Here in China, you never really had it because usually public transportation works quite well. And then looking at the overall customer car ownership statistics, they also never really had that many cars per 1,000 people. I mean, you talk about 200 cars per 1,000 people in China. Now, then what I said, they imagined it for this new modern Chinese family in mind. So multi-generational households with grandparents, great-grandparents in the car, massage seats, heating functions, like fridges that can heat and cool in the car. It gets very gimmicky there, you know. And
The third living space, like you mentioned earlier.
it's a third living space. Yeah, like you have the Nintendo Switch integration for your children in there. You have the rear seat entertainment where you run educational classes for your children, all that kind of stuff.
Ultimate tuning.
Yeah, so like it gets them really into this playful feature area, and I think that trend definitely can catch on in other markets as well. So looking in the wider APEC region, I mean, a lot of Chinese manufacturers are now producing in Thailand, Indonesia, and a few other markets, Malaysia as well. And if you think of those markets, I mean, they never set new benchmarks. That's also the people over there, they like these new living space concept. It's kind of gimmicky features. Or the other day I charged my Tesla Model 3 and was standing at the supercharger right next to me. There was a Chinese family parking with their Model Y and we're all singing KTV in the car.
Oh, wow.
You know,
This is happening today.
This is happening today in China, and I feel these kind of gimmicky things are always a way to entertain users and keep them longer in their cars, and then have this really living space approach to that. And I think that's where it makes sense to look at the concepts they are doing. But then if you go down to the technical level, I mean, as I said, they learned from the Tesla playbook. Now the electronic architectures are just looking almost like the Tesla ones. Are very simplified, very centralized. Like there is a word for that, zonal architecture. But it's basically a centralized computing unit, basically, and that of course cuts costs. And still, from a functional safety perspective, they're still very safe, you know. So then they have built-in functional safety algorithms. So if part of the architecture fails, the car is still running and all that stuff. And all these aspects, from the final customer experience to like the nitty-gritty technical details, I think Western manufacturers should look at that in more detail and keeping up with the Joneses, kind of.
I see. So let's switch to the other side. What about Chinese EV makers wanting to export to other markets? You mentioned that in China, the consumer behave in very different ways from the rest of the world. When a Chinese EV maker wants to export, let's say to the US or to Germany, what advice would you give them so that they can become more competitive and adapted to the local audience?
I mean, I think I started different because I think for those car manufacturers, I said it now, like Southeast Asia is a proven choice and a smart choice because their general customer profiles are maybe similar to some extent if you look at age profiles, but also like general car ownership never really was there, so you can establish something completely new. And people love obviously as gimmicky stuff, comicky stuff, personal assistants, avatars, you name it, all these things you have that. I think this is definitely easy step, and what I said, a lot of manufacturers already set up shop there, they see it as well as an easy step. Now Europe itself, this is now a personal opinion, they might need a couple of more years to educate the people. I mean, of course, coming back to the Tesla example, Tesla gave them a lot of kind of ideas, and we're looking at the German market, for instance, where now Tesla sales are going through the roof. Suddenly people experience that and they kind of get a hang of it. And now it maybe comes down a little bit to sustaining for a longer run in those markets until they're really ready to embrace these wacky or like very experiential concepts, car as a living space and not just a mobility tool. And in the United States, this is something I cannot really argue about. And maybe there are even more restrictions if you look at the media in terms of industrial policy, but that's not where I'm the expert at this stage.
Let's see. So Tesla does have the prestigious image, right? So there's many European car brands, like you mentioned Mercedes, Porsche. These are sought after brands. However, when it comes to Chinese branded vehicles, do you think Chinese brands can receive such prestige in foreign markets? Because you know how China has been known for being the manufacturer of the world, so branding isn't necessarily a strength.
Yeah, but then also the history is full, or like the new history is full of brands entering foreign markets. I mean, TikTok is a Chinese example. It's not a very long.
But it's not playing the prestigious angle. TikTok is a utility platform,
yeah, but
not really a brand that people love. It's not like Hermes or Chanel or LV.
But then it's also like the Chinese manufacturers that don't play the prestigious angle. Like most of the playbooks that you see there is this kind of like high-tech sci-fi playbook, and that's also how they position themselves in the Chinese market. I mean, I said it earlier with the sensor sets they built in, like they really then made it kind of a customer requirement where the customer wouldn't buy any car anymore that doesn't have a LiDAR. And it was all just marketing. So they didn't have existing brand recognition. So they were really going for like, we are a software company, we are a high-tech company, we are a startup. Therefore, we build an XYZ technology. We talk about the chipsets. We talk about the TOPS, so the trillions operation per second, where you can argue about whether this is the right unit, whether it will replace horsepower, yes or no. But they started with all of these kind of high-tech kind of communication features, and the customers caught on. And I think that's a different way to brand than if you're saying like, okay, I am now a brand XYZ, I want to be a heritage brand, just like the names you just mentioned about. So I think this is where they really go for this new EV high-tech kind of approach. And look at BYD. I mean, the success they have in foreign markets, like Australia, the sales figures going through the roofs basically. I mean, what was it the other day? They opened the registration for one of their new cars on the website to buy a car, and then within a few seconds it crashed. There's so much demand for those cars that shows me that there is demand for those cars if you do like a little bit different positioning to what the old guys or like the established guys were doing. But I mean, even Tesla by that sense, they're established, but they also still do this high-tech kind of communication. So again, drilling it back to that comparison, it's a lot of eye to eye, like a little bit copy-paste from Tesla, but even more improved, like this incremental innovation basically.
Fascinating. Thank you so much.